Okay, so the recording started. Now, I actually wanted to ask you that you have studied A levels under which school actually?
I studied under Sherborne, Qatar.
Okay, and your results were out on May 2025 sessions, right? So, what was your grades actually?
So for this year for math, I managed to get A star. For chemistry, I got A, and for physics, I got A.
And I think you lost like the A star in chemistry for like 1 or 2 marks, right?
Yeah, it was only a few marks away, but because I already got into the program, I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it actually doesn't have any difference, to be honest, like the A star and A, right? I mean, obviously, it kind of enhances your profile, but otherwise, it's quite the same. At the end, you got into your Manchester University, so I guess that's the end. You're supposed to be there, so it really doesn't matter if you have A or A star. They both are the same grades. Now, I actually wanted to ask you that since for your entire, like what, 2 years of journey in A levels, right? You have studied obviously a lot, you are a lot consistent in the classes. So what do you think that, how did you prepare for the exams that made you got A in A levels?
So, first of all, it was my experience in AS. I think AS is different from GCSE. So, after AS, it kind of gave me a taster. So, when it came to A2, I realized that you can't waste your time too much, doing notes, writing things. You have to actually put your information into practice. So, I started very early doing topical questions after every single topic. And once I felt like I had a grasp, that was when I started doing revision videos. So especially like watching the recordings again sometimes, and then also active recall. So I always had a whiteboard or like my iPad and trying to make sure that I remembered things, and also avoiding looking at the mark scheme, like relying on the mark scheme too much without actually
Yes,
putting it into.
that's actually a
um,
problem, relying on the mark schemes entirely.
yeah. And then I think one of the most important things was actually starting a bit earlier. When it came to AS, I started really, really late with my revision. I started just a month before exams, and it was so much work that I wasn't used to it. So starting a few months ahead was really helpful.
Right. Because, so many people think that, I studied O levels in 3 months and I got A stars in everything. So I can do the same thing for physics and chemistry in A levels also. But when you actually open the question paper, you see that, okay, whatever I was studying is not quite relevant to the question paper. And it's quite entirely different because in the IGCSEs it's mostly theoretical, like they ask you the theories directly so you can just memorize the notes and paste it on the exam papers, but for A levels it's quite difficult. So how do you think that you cope up with this fear that every question is different and every question is initiates a creative thinking inside you? So how did you overcome that fear?
First of all, it's obviously nerves will always come up during exams, but you have to kind of get used to the structure itself. So one of the ways would be looking at what one thing I really realized was looking at old papers and also UK papers sometimes. The question structure doesn't ever change so significantly. It still follows a similar pattern, but in the paper it might be about gravitational forces, but in this paper it was about other forces. I think the main key was to make sure that my basis of the content was strong, that I actually understood the concepts instead of just, answering the questions, because they changed the mark scheme as well. It's not like the mark scheme is going to stay the same every single year. You have to make sure that you also understand the different structure. Excel has actually definitions for every single word, like suggest, explain, and they have explanations for how you should structure your answer, and they will always slightly put the answer inside of the question, like they will push you towards it. And once you realize a pattern, I started highlighting. That was one of the things that helped me a lot, especially with chemistry. I would always highlight the question, because when it came to actually answering in the paper, I realized my answers were a lot more accurate because I highlighted the keywords.
Right. In chemistry, they have the lot big questions. Like I think the question size is like half of the page. So you have a lot of information to keep in mind. Right. Now, I actually wanted to ask you that you were in my A-level physics class for the May 2025 session, right? So do you think, is there anything that I could improve in my classes or what was actually beneficial in my classes that helped you get your grades?
So, in terms of your classes, it was very helpful actually, the frequency of the classes. I remember before your classes, I was the type of person that was kind of negligent in the sense that when the weekend comes, I'll revise on the weekend, or like when I have free time, I'll do it. Especially because physics was especially the subject that I didn't enjoy much because of my struggles in AS. So having
Okay.
those frequent lessons and also actually feeling like you're engaging with the class, that was another helpful thing. You would always ask people and you make sure to cycle through everyone in the class. It wasn't like only focusing on one third person, so I made sure that I was always focused and alert during their classes. Just I think the only thing that could be an issue is just the fact that it's online. Some people may do better when it's like face to face, but for me, I didn't have that struggle because at that point I knew that I had to take my studies seriously.
Right. It's actually within yourself, right? Doesn't matter if you're attending the class offline or online. And I think that, providing the recordings was also quite helpful because you could revise again and again from the same thing. You don't have to, ask the teacher that, okay, please explain me this topic again because you have access to everything in the classroom. Right. Now, I actually also wanted to ask that since, you got your grades in this August, right? So did you only applied for Manchester or was there any other universities you applied?
So actually, I mainly focused my applications within the UK just because I did A levels. So I applied to Manchester, to Newcastle, to Bath, to UCL, and to Edinburgh. And out of all of my options, actually Manchester was my hardest one. They required A star AA, and also Bath did A star AA. So when it came to finally choosing, you get 5 choices, then you have to choose two. I chose Manchester as my top because in the world, it's rated top 13 within the program that I want
Right.
to do. So I felt like that would give me a safety blanket. And then for my second option, I chose Newcastle because, it's just a safety blanket in case I didn't get into Manchester. Still did.
Right. I can understand. Now, again, what, if you were involved in any extracurricular activity that actually helped you to get into Manchester?
So during my schooling career, I made sure to sign up for some engineering or more like science-based activities. So science fairs, I was helping out with those. Another thing was I joined a national competition in Qatar to build a cooling tank for a truck, and we won 3rd place over like the national competition. There was apparently 350 schools competing. Other things I did was also debates, but I always focused on like environmental or engineering-based debate, science especially. But I feel like one thing I realized is after doing like focusing in physics classes and doing physics classes, it actually helped my understanding more in those projects, like especially like thermodynamics and energy. That was something that came up a lot in those projects, and it was something that came from my physics classes.
Yeah. And I actually remember maybe in last year, September or August, you guys were very busy with these programs. I think you and Aisha were attending the same thing together, right? Yeah, I remember. You had to skip some classes for this. But I guess at the end everything sums up. Even if you skipped some classes, you got the good grades and you got into good university. Actually, the Russell Group University, right? This is one of the Russell Group universities. Yeah. So now, is there anything at the end, if you want to advise for your fellow AS A2 students, what they should do in order to, get good grades like you and eventually get into a, good university at the end?
So one thing I want to say is you have to be realistic with yourself. After GCSEs, especially, that's when I think it's more important to be realistic. For me, it started after AS, but the earlier you start, the better. So let's say you come out of your GCSEs and you got 6s or you got 7s or you got 8s and 9s. It's still very important to be realistic with yourself and figure out, okay, I want to continue this into my A levels, like for example, physics and maths. Am I strong? Am I weak? And then once you've analyzed this, you want to see, okay, the first term, how am I organizing my revision? Am I doing well? How am I doing on these diagnostic tests? And I think after that point, you have to get into a routine where you're being critical of yourself, because this is important, because even when you get into university, you're not going to get the chance to redo things like you do in school. So then once you figured out how you're doing in school, that's when you're going to choose, okay, am I going to go and get extra help? Physics classes, like that was it for me. After my AS, I didn't get grades I wanted in physics during my AS levels, and I did have to redo, which it did hurt my esteem. But in that moment, I had to stop and be realistic with myself and be honest with myself and say, you have to pick up your revision. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take care of yourself. Obviously, sometimes you give yourself breaks, but you want to give yourself specific timelines. Like for me, I opened a Google Calendar for the first time. Okay, by this month I want to complete this, and then by this month I want to do this, and I want to make sure that I completed all of these questions and these topical questions. But I also want to make sure it's also realistic as well, making like no one's a superhuman when it comes to studying. You have to press,
Obviously.
but yeah. A's and A stars, they may seem like out of touch, but it is, you can get it, especially for me for math. I remember my school didn't want to predict me an A star for math because they said it wasn't realistic. But somehow, during this year, I worked really, really hard with setting realistic boundaries, especially for me. I knew maybe in physics I won't get an star, but I can get an A. So I focused on these like aspects, and I managed to get full UMS in a few of my math papers, thank God. And also, I did really well in physics, which was really helpful for me, for university.
Yeah, because you're in engineering program, so obviously it will help you eventually. But now, you say that you have to be eventually consistent at the end, right? Like I have to be consistent over the entire year. Usually for you school candidates, what happened that the school starts in September and they just rush you for unit 1 and unit 4 in 3 months, and then again then rush you for from February to the April, they rush you for the other units, right? So I would suggest no, not going for the rush. I would suggest starting a little earlier, maybe in June or July, so that you have a lot of time to finish the contents, finish the topic wise, finish the question papers, and then sit for the mocks, right? So it gives the time of a year to finish all these things. For IGCSEs, I would suggest that this is possible. They can start in September and then finish by May. But for A levels, it's actually quite tough to start in September and then finish everything by May, June.
Actually, one thing is when I had joined your classes, there were people in your classes that were doing the Jan papers. I wish if I had known earlier, like during my AS sessions, I really wish I could have done that, done my unit ones a few months earlier, in January, because it's not only just like, that's not rushing in my opinion. I think because once you've done your unit 1, when you get your result back, that gives you the reality check a lot earlier. Like if I had known last year that in physics I wasn't had an AS, I wouldn't have done as well. I think I would have been more consistent within my AS year, and been ready from the start.
Right. Yes, because you actually have to have a reality check, because in IGCSEs the checkings are so easy, and then you move to AS, and then after giving one unit you realize that no, it's not so much easy anymore this time. Right. Okay, Saza, thank you so much for actually sharing your kind words with everyone, and I hope all the best for your bright future, because you're going to study in Manchester, and that's like one of the biggest universities anyone can get into, right? So all the best for your futures.
Thank you so much, Miss. Have a good evening.
Thank you.